A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Abraham Lincoln, June 16, 1858. Abraham Lincoln gave the noteworthy House-divided speech at the Illinois Republican Convention in Springfield. Lincoln argued that the slavery disagreement between the abolitionist North and the pro-slavery South was tearing the nation apart. The farming-based Southern economy relied more heavily on slaves than the industrial economy of the North. Lincoln believed that the federal government had the authority to eliminate the spread of slavery, a practice that he felt was immoral and unconstitutional, while many states believed the issue of slavery should be decided by the states themselves. However, Lincoln did not want to cause unrest between the North and the South. He was most concerned with the preservation of the Union altogether. According to Philip S. Paulden, Lincoln believed the Union existed to achieve an ideal of equal liberty under which all people could govern themselves and have a fair chance in the race of life. The ultimate threat to this goal was slavery, which the government could put on the course of ultimate extinction. In the beginning of the document, Lincoln mentions how we are far into the 5th year since the policy was initiated. This is referencing how it had been 5 years since the passage of the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repealed the Missouri Compromise by allowing territories to decide the question of slavery with popular sovereignty. Many Northerners were angry with this act because territory made free by the Missouri Compromise could now become slave states. This decision agitated Lincoln, which he explained in a letter to his friend Joshua Speed on August 24, 1855. You ought rather to appreciate how much the great body of the Northern people crucify their feelings in order to maintain their loyalty to the Constitution and the Union. He was not satisfied with the lack of credit being given to the North for how much they desired to maintain the Union. In addition, Lincoln also described the Kansas-Nebraska Act as being particularly violent. It was conceived in violence, passed in violence, is maintained in violence, and is being executed in violence. This violence began with the destruction of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and it continued with Bleeding Kansas, where much blood was spilled between people fighting to have these states established as either slave or free states. This violence was unacceptable because it caused further conflict and unrest between both sides. The next part of the speech dealt with slavery and how it caused agitation. Lincoln said that this slavery agitation would not cease, and that the government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. It will become all one thing or all the other. Therefore, Lincoln believed that eventually the nation would have to become a completely free or completely slave nation. Ultimately, Lincoln's goal was to end the spread of slavery, but he realized that this might not happen. Although he desired to contain slavery, he was most concerned with avoiding conflict and maintaining the status of the Union. Therefore, he chose his wording carefully because he recognized the hardening of both the North and the South and their growing unwillingness to compromise. For example, he said that either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, displaying how he was trying to use neutral language to avoid offending anyone, but he hoped that slavery would eventually die out. During the time of his letter to Speed, Lincoln started to imagine a constitutional system that challenged slavery and promoted equality. He was especially interested in the joint principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and sought to achieve the idea that all men are created equal. However, this was difficult for him because as a lawyer and a politician, he faced pressure to publicly agree with conservative ideals. His Unionist ideals were radical, even for some other Unionists, and were not popular, especially for voters that feared radical Republicans. In addition, Lincoln discussed how Democratic candidate Stephen Douglas's idea of popular sovereignty opened the door for the spread of slavery. Douglas felt that popular sovereignty justified the repeal of the Missouri Compromise because it allowed people to make their own decisions about slavery based on popular opinion. However, Lincoln felt that this popular government opinion made racial discrimination easier, thereby contradicting the premise of all men are created equal in the Constitution. Lincoln rejected Douglas's idea that popular sovereignty can make the U.S. both slave and free, and believed that Douglas actually wanted to nationalize slavery. Lincoln argued that restriction of slavery had been an idea of the founders of the Constitution, and that Douglas and the Democrats were no longer upholding this ideal. Furthermore, Lincoln was convinced that there was a conspiracy to spread slavery, led by Douglas and President James Buchanan. These kinds of charges were unheard of at the time, and there was no real factual basis in them. However, Lincoln needed to distinguish himself clearly from Douglas so that voters would not agree with Horace Greeley's idea that they would both execute the same goal, but with different methods. Additionally, Lincoln's speech intended to detract from claims that Douglas was independent from Buchanan. He also hoped to unite the party with Republican principles, minimizing the number of people that differed from the party. Ultimately, Lincoln was hopeful that success would come. He stated that the result is not doubtful. We shall not fail. If we stand firm, we shall not fail. Wise counsels may accelerate or mistakes delay it, but sooner or later the victory is sure to come. He suggested that this plot to spread slavery stemmed from the Dred Scott decision and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. These both strengthened Lincoln's conspiracy belief that popular sovereignty threatened Republican ideals, which Lincoln felt neglected the immorality of slavery. The Dred Scott decision, combined with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, were two parts in an interlocking machine, and there would be another part, or second Dred Scott-like decision, that would say that no state could outlaw slavery. There was nothing to stop the nation from becoming more and more pro-slavery. Overall, Lincoln was satisfied with his speech, but his advisors were concerned that it would hurt him politically because it misled people to believe he was advocating for the abolition of slavery as opposed to its slow extinction. Casting himself as an abolitionist would be political suicide. Douglas thought the speech was a gift handed to him by Lincoln because with this he could claim that Lincoln was an abolitionist. He would later mention this speech and Lincoln's supposed abolitionist ideals in the majority of the Lincoln-Douglas Senate debates. Therefore, Lincoln spent most of his campaign for Senate refuting the radical ideals presented in the speech. Although the speech was initially a burden for Lincoln, in the long run it created a positive legacy, helping him gain national attention. Lincoln's speech is so successful and memorable because of the way that he sets up his argument. He uses descriptive and powerful language and imagery to support his argument, setting up his goals for the future. His language in the speech is also very effective in tearing down and distancing himself from Douglas. Furthermore, he sets up his argument very carefully to disguise his negative remarks in order to avoid offense. Although initially seen as negative for Lincoln, the speech earned him more national attention, both positive and controversial, helping him win the presidency in 1860 and creating a lifelong legacy for his role in slavery.